Okay, and we are now live streaming as well. Hey, all. Drew, it has been a while since I've seen you here. How you doing? All right. Welcome, Calites. Good. Okay. Nice. All right, I think we're ready to go. I will start the... Let's get this up here. I'll start the podcast recording in just a moment, everybody. Before I actually do the podcast recording, we're now live on all of the platforms. Welcome all. I'm going to do the little tutorial here. So this is about a 45 to 50 minute podcast recording. The first 20 to 25 will be just me and Nate one-on-one to get a intro to Nate's background as well as the introduction to today's topic. Once we have finished doing that, we'll be answering questions live from the audience. So if you have questions for Nate, you can drop them in any of the live chats. If you're here in Discord, Discord tends to get a little bit more active. Hi, Christy, welcome. So if you have questions for Nate here in the Discord, do me a favor and mark them for me with a Q emoji like this. And then if you like a particular question, you can hit that Q emoji again. And that way I know that you have that multiple people want that question answered. So I can give a little bit more priority to those questions. For the most part, I will go through questions in chronological order. So the earlier you ask your questions, including while Nate's still just talking, the more likely you are to get your questions answered. So drop your questions in any of the chats, and I will monitor those in the second half of the episode. I think we are ready to start. Today we are talking with Nate Purkeypile from Just Purkey Games, as well as from Bethesda, and we're going to be talking about shipping things, which is one of my very favorite topics. Nate, you ready to actually start?
Yeah, I'm all good.
All right. Let me get the soundboard in here, and let's start the actual recording. Oh, wrong button. Hold on. And there it is. All right. Here to go. All right. Here we go. Welcome, indie game developers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour, the best dang indie game podcast on the planet. Today, we're talking with Nate Purkeypile of Just Purkey Games and Bethesda fame about shipping things. Don't just focus on your something. Hold on. I can't read my own handwriting. We're going to do that intro one more time. Don't just focus on, what is the last word I'm missing there, Nate?
It's craft.
On your craft. My God. Okay. Hold up. Second time's the charm. Okay. Luckily, I'm not the one who has to edit the actual recording. I'm so sorry, Kath. We love you. Thank you. One more time. All right. Let's get that restarted. Second time's the charm. Here we go. Welcome, indie game developers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour, the best dang indie game podcast on the planet. Today, we're talking with Nate Purkeypile of Just Purkey Games and Bethesda fame, the creators of The Axis Unseen, about ship things. Don't just focus on the craft.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to hear real game dev stories from real indie game developers, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. This is a mostly unedited recording of a weekly event we host in the Indie Game Academy Discord channel every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, so feel free to swing by and join us for the next one. We're your hosts, Willem Delventhal and Tim Wood, but Tim is sadly not here today, so I will be alone again, like the origin of this podcast, running the show with Nate myself. Today, we are being joined by Nate Purkeypile. Nate has a wealth of experience. He is currently a solo/indie developer and the founder of Just Purkey Games, and he has a ton of experience, largely from Bethesda. So we'll have some interesting trivia and origin stories here. Nate, welcome to the show. What are you having for lunch today?
Today, I'm having coffee so far.
Me too. A man after my own heart. Beautiful.
Yeah.
I ran out
How you
of
ship games.
yeah, that's how you ship games. I ran out of creamer a couple of days ago, so it's also just strictly black for the past 3 days. And I have not corrected this situation. It's fine.
Could be worse.
Could be worse, definitely. Well, welcome to the show, Nate. So it is. I love. There's a certain romance that comes with solo developers. I think, where it is a lot easier from the outside to point at somebody like Stardew Valley creator and be like, wow, that person created an incredible indie title on their own over 4 years. How incredible that is, versus actually being in the seat of a solo developer and doing an ungodly amount of work on your projects on your own. So you are both a solo developer at your company, Just Purkey Games, and also have a very fascinating history of professional game development in the game industry. Before we start talking about the subject of just shipping things, I'd love to hear, as always, the first question on the show, which is the origin story. So, Nate, tell us about who you are, where you are in games now, and how you got there.
Well, now I've been making games for like 21 years, I think. I could be off. I'm probably losing track at this point. But yeah, 14 of those were at Bethesda, like you said. But I started making games all the way back in, I think it was third grade on like Apple computers before we had color or anything. And back then, kids would be like, oh, I want to be a firefighter or whatever. And, most people change their mind. But I was like, I'm going to make video games. And I just stuck with that, even though it was far less of an actual career at the time.
Amazing. And how did you wind up actually working your way in then?
So I started with those Apple games, but then I moved on to like Doom mods and Half-Life mods and worked on stuff like Action Half-Life, which some people have heard of. And then I was the head of my own called Desert Crisis. And then I went to college for art for games, basically at DigiPen. And back then they only had like the 2-year program, thankfully, because it was kind of intense. But I graduated as valedictorian.
Wow.
But I skipped graduation because I got a job.
Wow. Okay. About the best reason to skip graduation I think there is.
Yeah, they were probably not too happy about that, though.
Wait, so they just had no valedictorian, they had nobody to give the speech?
Yeah, I think they had the, what is it, salutatorian give the speech.
Wow. And then, so what is the job that you landed there? What's that first role?
My first job was at Terminal Reality, and they were near Dallas, Texas. So I worked on like Blood Rain 2 and Aeon Flux and the game that was in the movie Grandma's Boy, which was going to be a real game but got canceled.
No way. Wait, that's such a cool piece of trivia. I way back in the day when I first started learning to make games, I watched Grandma's Boy and thought this is ridiculous. Specifically, I was thinking about the bug that the antagonist is trying to solve, where the character's head keeps popping off, and I was really frustrated with that. And I remember thinking, like, that's ridiculous. If the head was popping off, you would know why that's popping off. That would have to exist somewhere. Like, there needs to be some function for it. Now that I've been making games for over 10 years, that totally could be something that you can't solve, and there's no way to figure out why. Amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
I don't think computers are predictable at all. Like the things that I've seen, especially working on like Bethesda games. You're like, how did this possibly happen? It's like demons in the machine.
Yeah. That's where the AI sentience overthrow will come from, I think, is poorly coded, or not just poorly coded, just overly complex gaming AI, probably. Well, wow.
Yeah, exactly.
That's super interesting. I, first of all, didn't know that piece of trivia, so I love that I got to learn that with you. Thank you for that. I didn't know that the game in Grandma's Boy was actually going to be a thing. Was it going to be like a movie tie-in, or was it just like they used this game as the showcase kind of thing?
It was like a weird marketing thing where they, which still doesn't entirely make sense to me, to like promote a game, but then in the movie world, it's like made by a dude. Like, it's kind of a confusing marketing pitch, if you ask me.
I would have bought it just to be able to say I could. Amazing. And then you worked your way into Bethesda. So tell us about landing that role as well.
Yeah, so I got that job basically from other people who worked at Terminal Reality, because it was like an incubator for all the game studios across the entire industry. Like, had a lot of really, really talented people, but they obviously left and went other places. So then I ended up going there. I had a little stint at Retro Studios in between, but then moved to Bethesda after that.
Amazing. Okay. And then Bethesda, tell us about some of your work there and that experience.
So I started on Fallout 3, and that's basically the reason that I came to the company. Like some people are big Elder Scrolls fans, but I had been a huge fan of the Fallout games since the originals, and even did like my junior and senior projects in high school on nuclear weapons.
Okay.
So that was definitely why I went there. And so I worked on Fallout 3 and did like Little Lamplight and stuff, and Paradise Falls, a whole bunch of other cities. Tenpenny, did a lot of the lighting. Moved
Wow.
on to Skyrim, did a lot of the dungeon kits on that, like the Imperial Forts and the ice caves, the regular caves. I've spent way too long doing caves in my life. I don't want to do any more caves, honestly. And yeah, I did most of the lighting on that.
Okay. And then, so
Moving
does
on
that mean professionally, what were you doing at Bethesda and throughout your career? What is your typical role in the game industry?
My typical role was like world art and lighting,
Okay.
focusing on kits and cities.
Okay. And so you chose, after getting completely fed up with interior lighting and cave systems and lots of shadows, you chose to make a horror game with dark, dingy lighting as your first indie title, is what I'm coming to understand here.
No caves this time, though.
No caves, though. Okay, great.
But I never really got sick of the lighting part. That's far less repetitive than staring at just rocks.
Just caves, I can imagine. Bethesda games in particular, they love their caves, I feel like. Well, amazing. So after this 14-year stint at Bethesda, where you gain experience on all of these prominent titles, making the world's beautiful, thank you for your service, by the way. I think many people can attribute why they make games at all to Bethesda. So thank you for making some cool games for us. You decided to found your own studio. So tell me about that process, why you did it, and then what the process was like actually getting started.
Me and I had been doing games for a long time at that point, and I had always kind of wanted to go indie. And I just didn't like the scale of the studio anymore. I liked spending more of my time making games, but when you have like 500 people, there is a whole bunch of meetings and production processes and stuff. So I really wanted to just focus on making the game. So I checked out like Unreal 5, and it seemed like a really good opportunity to leverage my skills doing open world stuff in a different engine. So I jumped ship and started my own thing. And I also had pretty young kids at the time, because a lot of people around then were like getting all this money to start all these studios and stuff. And everyone's like, oh, why don't you want to do that? I'm like, I just want like a flexible schedule and just make the games. And it seemed like something that I thought I could do, because I always kind of jumped around doing a lot of different things. And so I did it.
So then, are you entirely self-financed? Is that what you're implying there?
Yeah, I didn't take any publisher funds or anything like that. I just saved up money and stuff. And my wife had finally finished like med school and stuff. And so even if I didn't sell any copies, there was sort of a fallback there. Thankfully, it's done like okay, but I'm not like retiring on an island or anything.
That is it is always interesting asking people how they manage to finance their indie studios. I think the vast majority of the time, what I hear is side hustle. The studio starts while they're making job another way. And then I think the second most common one is what you just said there, which is you somehow saved up enough money to have a runway that allowed you to launch the game. That is what I did with my first company, only my first game didn't make money. So you're beating me. You're beating me there, Nate. All right. Well, fascinating. So
I mean, I probably would have made more if I stayed there, but
right. Yeah, I've had the same thought. The process of starting an indie studio is definitely not easy. And I firmly believe in here we're in a largely educational setting. Most of the people who listen to this podcast or are part of this community are here to learn to make games and potentially one day launch that dream studio and build that dream game. But one of the common problems, I guess, in the indie space, and especially the like self-employed or solo development space, is the problem of actually getting the damn game done and out the door. I have my dear mother, I mention a quote from her pretty often on this show because I love it. She was an acting teacher. She's retired now, but she worked in theater, like stage theater. And one of her quotes to her students, I think, has always been one of my favorites, which is, "Done is beautiful. It is far more important to get the damn thing done and out there than get stuck in polish hell, because it's far too easy to do that." I've heard of so many indie stories of a project that was supposed to take 6 months and it took 4 years because you just needed that one more feature or whatever. So your topic of today is something I care about and I think is important to all indies and especially solo devs out there, which is ship things, don't just focus on the craft. I would love to get your intro to that, your 101. So what message or lesson are you trying to impart on our community with that subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is to set how long you have for a thing and spend that amount of time. Because a lot of people in the indie space don't even necessarily schedule stuff at all. And that's incredibly dangerous. Like, it's okay to have a little bit of that experimentation time in the beginning, but then you kind of need to set metrics and try and like stick to that. And that's something I had to get really good at working at Bethesda, right? Because those games are massive. When I was at Retro, you'd get like a whole month for a room. I might have done some of those rooms at Bethesda in like 5 minutes, but that doesn't mean you're not going to get better every time. Because I also think every single time you do something, you're going to get better. And in college, I saw a lot of people just kind of like thinking about their thing and like rotating around the models all day and stuff. And it's like you just got to keep moving. And it's often better if you just come back to it later anyways and look at it, because then you have fresh eyes versus staring at it, trying to polish and polish and polish. It just doesn't work very well, I think.
Yeah, it is interesting. So when I first got started, I was working at a company called Lumosity, Brain Training Games. So we were making very small budget, small time length games. So most of my projects for the first half of my career were like anywhere between 6 and maybe 10 months at the longest, until ship. So, from the moment we're even talking about what we should build to the moment it is in players' hands for the first time, like not just in a beta test, actually for reals, is at most 10 months. That's quite fast in general. And that like even that is long. 10 months, if you think about it, is a long period of time. My partner, for instance, is a musician, and a single song, one of her single like units of product, the thing that she ships, usually is only going to take her a couple of months at absolute most. So game dev in general, the length from start to end is an art form that takes a really long time to build, and generally takes a lot of people at that larger scale when we're talking about our AAAs and our big successful companies. Solo dev is this weird, interesting microcosm that's kind of different. But regardless, it takes a really long time to ship games. And the problem that presents is that you can get stuck building a game that just doesn't do that well or isn't that good to begin with. I see a lot of especially juniors or indies fall in love with a project and build it for the love of it, and then expect a financial return from the project that they really only built because they loved it, as opposed to building something that they have proven or found an actual audience for that loves it besides you, just the developer. That cycle time can really kill you. If it takes you 2 years to build a game, in your entire lifetime, at best, you're going to make like 30 games, versus like, yeah, any other art form, you're going to actually move through that cycle much faster. So figuring out how to actually get to your date and ship on your date, I fully agree, is one of the biggest skills that an indie or a junior needs. I love at IGA, we love the concept of learning by launching. Get your damn game done and get it out there first. And then you can move on to the next dream game. If you're just getting started, ship a couple of games. Don't worry about them being perfect before you commit to anything really big.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think there's soft ways to launch too, to sort of get a better feel for that. Like some people have started launching their games on itch, or, just announce early. And then you have a better idea of like, what is the actual audience reception? And you can kind of scale it to that. And like, I announced the Access Unseen really early into the project. It was like 6 months in. All I really had was the prototype, but I wanted to make sure, like, do I actually want to spend like 3 more years on it? Does that actually make sense? Or is it a terrible idea? And I think that's good, because it was a scalable design. Like, it's an open world hunting game, right? I could have done like 1 region instead of 6, and it still would have been like the same kind of game, just not as big.
Yeah, that's an interesting little side point that you make there. So it is a, quote, scalable design. So before we continue, that's a great topic for somebody who doesn't know what that means to know about. So tell us what it means for a game to have a scalable design.
Well, instead of being like a linear narrative where there's this exact pieces that all need to fit together, it's something a little more systems based, where you could cut out significant chunks of it and the core experience would still be there. And that definitely applies to like open world games like this, where it's not so tied to the narrative. It's not to say there's no narrative, but it's not, beat for beat like an Uncharted game or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a way for you to get the core wonderful experience of a game in a smaller package, and then there's also in addition a way to sort of plug in more to that package and make it bigger, which means that if you find an
Right.
audience for it, you can easily scale more for that audience, keep them entertained, keep them excited, and hopefully continue your sales rolling in. Very interesting. Now, the second half of your topic, you said ship things, don't just focus on the craft. Can you tell me what you mean by don't just focus on the craft?
That is another thing that a lot of people who are just starting do, especially on the art side, I've seen where they're just like making models that make cool portfolio pieces and stuff, as opposed to actually shipping something. Because doing art on its own, that does teach you some stuff, but how that art then integrates into a game with all of the other departments and all that, that matters a whole lot. So you really need to actually ship things and not just get your portfolio.
Yeah, I agree with that one wholeheartedly. It is really, I think, like this is maybe even advice that we have given in the past. It's easy as somebody who's trying to break into the game industry to hear the first thing you have to do is to build up a portfolio, and that is true. A portfolio is more or less a prerequisite to get hired anywhere at this point in time. But the maybe the double-edged sword to that advice is that you should still be thinking of your portfolio as completable, releasable projects, like full projects. I have seen people effectively make demo projects, but I think that is a dramatically different mindset. So if I'm trying to show that I'm like a kick-ass engineer, I might make a demo project where I do some sort of hard engineering as an example. Like maybe I'm going to make, like, I feel like I've seen one of the classic examples is like flocking behavior or something like that. I'm going to make a cool little demo where birds flock in an interesting way via an algorithm that I created and generated myself. That is definitely valuable, but is dramatically different from an actual like released title that attempted to be a functional title, attempted to make money probably, and attempted to identify a real audience, and attempted to be satisfying from start to finish. That is something that you need as an indie and as somebody who's trying to break in. And the more you do that, the better you get at actually releasing things that people want to pay for. So that it's sort of a no-brainer that you would spend the time to build something that people actually want to play.
Yeah, and I think that the other part of that is that it's not then just your craft that you're caring about, it's everybody's, because some people just don't know how the other parts of the games work, and that's a huge part of your job, where you're going to be interfacing with all these different people.
Tell us about actually, so this brings up the subject of solo development at all. Tell us a little bit about how your development cycle, how your development process changed from working at Bethesda, where you have an incredible amount of co-support and collaborators, versus now as a solo developer where you do literally everything. How is the process different?
I mean, it's harder in ways, but it's also easier in other ways, because you can also design and create systems in a really cohesive way where you know how the art and the systems work together. So I've definitely made entire systems in less time than it took to get those approved. That said, you do need to then learn how to do that. But I had actually started way back when, before I did art. Like, I was more of a programmer growing up. So not to say I'm like a great programmer or anything, but I had way more of a coding background than most people who did art. And that was really helpful. And so to me, picking up Unreal was actually incredibly easy. And I thought it was a great breath of fresh air, and doing everything was way faster than I was used to.
Interesting. Yeah, I also got started as an engineer first and then switched into game design. And I still point back to that as a really valuable time of my life, because even though code changes over time, the ability to even conceptualize what my engineers are doing, or for that matter, do some solo dev or some engineering on my own, is very valuable. How about this? How do people get, do you think it's important to practice that large scale collaboration or even mid scale collaboration if you're going to be a solo dev?
Yeah, I think so, because there's still a pretty good chance that you're going to have to work with like some contractors, and you might not be a solo dev forever. So I think it's always a useful thing to have.
Okay, so how do you practice it as an indie?
I mean, working on smaller projects like mod teams and stuff like that are always a good way to do it.
Okay. Here's another question that I debate a lot with people. What is the like appropriate length of time for a completable project that you're going to ship? I know that, that'll vary by project, but your general rule, should it be a 6-month project, a year-long project, a 2-year project? What is for an indie that like knows their craft but doesn't have much of that portfolio yet, how long should they be spending before they ship?
I mean, I kind of lean towards more like a year or less.
Okay.
That way you have more chances.
Mm-hmm. And so yeah, tell me more.
Yeah. I obviously didn't do that for my first title, but there was a whole bunch of complicated reasons dealing with Unreal 5 and it being kind of new. So I wanted Epic to fix the bugs so I didn't have to, stuff like that, which ended up being very accurate.
Yeah. So tell us, actually, this is good. Good. So tell us about Axis Unseen and the development process of that game.
Yeah, overall it went really smooth since I liked working with Unreal. But like I said, Epic had some bugs and that was way above my pay grade to fix some of those things. Like I couldn't generate nav mesh for the entire map because it was way bigger than the normal thing for like almost a couple of years. I could only do chunks. So that's the other nice thing about being a solo dev is like, well, I guess I can't do that. I'll just move on to something else. I'll just make creatures for 6 months. I'll just build art or systems, but not the whole cohesive play experience. Whereas if you had a team, like if something like that was broken, you might just be completely blocked for some people.
That's really interesting. So a nav mesh is what, for anybody who may not know? Tell us the quick intro to that.
The nav mesh is what tells the AI where it can path. And, like you can go here, but not here. And without that, the AI won't move.
Yes. So it's an invisible layer that it's sort of like a simplification of an AI needing to see the whole actual world. Instead of having to actually understand the world, you pre-generate an area that the AI is allowed to walk. That's your nav mesh. It's an actual like a polygon sort of. It's an actual mesh where your AI is allowed to walk. So that's kind of interesting. Like, how would you have? Let's say that we were at a AAA company and Unreal's nav mesh is not working for you. What do you do at that point? How do you solve it at a large company with a large team?
I mean, at a large company, you would put it in as like a pretty high priority bug, and it would go to the engineering team, and it would go through the whole triage. Then you'd probably hear it's going to get fixed in like way longer than you want it to be. You might have to argue with people about that.
Okay, but still, so there's like a pathway where, because you're a larger company, especially a well-known company like Bethesda, Unreal themselves are going to prioritize something that you're having a problem with. But as a solo dev, you don't have that same like power, I guess, that same ability. So your solution was to work on other parts of the game and just hopefully wait until they fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I had a little bit of Epic support, and so I had access to their like UDN thing where you can ask actually Epic about it and stuff. And so I got more information about what was going on and when to expect a fix, but that doesn't mean I could make them fix it faster.
Right. Yeah.
They just see that other people are also agreeing, like, yeah, thumbs up. Yeah, that's a problem. So it helps a little bit, but yeah, I'm not exactly twisting the arm of a multi-billion-dollar company.
Amazing. All right. So I would love to hear, we're going to move into community questions here in a second, but I think most of the people who are a part of this community are looking to either work on or create a small scale indie team. I would say that solo devs are actually the minority. Most people here tend to work in small indie teams. We're talking anywhere between like 4 to 10 people. So what are some of your like your I wish I knew before lessons that you've now learned as an indie developer in this space, as a solo developer, as a small team indie? What are some of those like, here's the things you need to know before you get started lessons for us?
I mean, I think one that I did kind of expect, but is still easy for a lot of people to gloss over, is just how much time you're going to have to spend marketing and biz dev and whatnot. And just as a ballpark figure, I'm going to say it's like 30% of your time. And a lot of people will push that off and they'll be like, well, I want to focus on the game. I want to focus on the game. But at the end of the day, if no one knows about your game, like if you can afford to do that, great. But I would like to actually make money doing it. So you do have to prioritize it.
What a concept. Yeah, that's a really, really big one, and is a super common pitfall that I have seen as well. I think there's this I think there's a prevailing mindset that an indie is there for the art and therefore for building a wonderful game. They're not as much there for the sale. And so therefore the sale feels like this other where you're like, no, like I shouldn't focus on the capitalism. I should focus on making a wonderful game. But the reality is, y'all, it is capitalism. This is a product. And to get anybody
Yeah.
to actually buy the product, you need to spend the requisite hours to, get somebody to know about the product. And for that matter, having a strong community ahead of time makes the game phenomenally better because you have real humans playing the game, working with you, getting excited with you, giving you ideas, pointing out that something sucks or finding bugs for you for that matter. That generally makes a better game if you're doing that marketing from early on. Do you have any tips on how to like fit biz dev into your schedule when you don't just have a biz dev team?
I think just having sort of a pattern to your days is good. So I tend to do that stuff like in the morning as I'm drinking coffee and whatnot. And I think you can also get a lot more than you think you can. Like I asked for random stuff from like NVIDIA and Intel and AMD and
Ooh.
got free video cards and whatnot. And my friends are like installing their video drivers and they're like, dude, I just saw your game in there. How'd you do that? I'm like, well, I asked because they have people dedicated to this sort of like indie outreach to help market stuff and help their stuff look good. And if you're using something like Unreal, they'll be like, oh, can you implement DLSS? And it's like, that is actually super easy in Unreal. It's a plugin. It's 99% UI work. So you can do very little work and then get exposed to hundreds of thousands of people that you might not otherwise.
Yeah, this is a really great call out. This is another thing that I see people who have not worked professionally not even try to do. When they're first getting started, they think of things like getting a partnership with Unity as this like far off goal that's going to happen once my indie company is successful and big already. But a lot of companies have some sort of developer relations arm where that person's job or that arm's entire purpose is to basically get more developers using their software and to get their name out there. And for that matter, even just making like good PR, just being like, look, we help indies too. And even regardless of all of that, a lot of those companies, their bread and butter is, of course, working with developers. So finding partnerships and finding brand deals and finding just people to work with that are bigger than you expect you can find is actually like not necessarily easy. It typically requires a bunch of, imagine like digital door to door. It requires just a bunch of outreach and a bunch of never hearing from anybody. And then like one or two really cool partnerships that wind up coming out of that. It doesn't actually... it's not actually hard. It's just grunt work. It's just hitting up a lot of places and being like, hey, I'm working on this cool game. Here it is. I'm wondering if there's any way that we can partnership. I'm curious, actually, before we start doing community questions, do you have advice on that? Like, how do you approach that cold email or that cold outreach? Are you just saying, hey, I have a cool game? Are you targeting specific things? You're like, I noticed this cool software you guys just built. I would love to add that to my game. How do you wind up getting these companies to work with you?
For me, the biggest thing was just post stuff on LinkedIn because a lot of people ignore that for game promotion, but it ends up being really useful from that perspective of getting those people to then reach out to you even because they are always watching that space. And it's not a great place to find players probably, but when these deals come out of it, it ends up being absolutely worth that time. And it's not that hard to cross post there.
Amazing. All right, cool. So let's jump into some community questions. We have a few on the deck. If you have questions for Nate, feel free to drop them in the chats. I am watching them. But first question is from Christy. Christy says, as a solo dev, do you ever bring on contractors to help you with various parts of the game you're working on? If so, what is your process for onboarding them and integrating them into your workflow?
Yeah, so I have used a few contractors, like worked with a musician and some writers and someone to do drawing on the Axis Unseen. And to onboard them, I just send them a bunch of the material that I have, like my reference boards and my documentation, which honestly is like pretty light. Like I'm not a big documentation person, so it's like 5 pages of stuff. And then I usually do a call with them to like talk about it and if they have any questions and stuff and bring them on. And so it ends up being pretty straightforward. And I really like that process.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that our game design documentation is important. Creating like a formal game design doc, GDD, or even a one pager or something along those lines that goes, here's what we're aiming for, here's how the player should feel, here are some of the top objectives for the player experience. That's one of the biggest reasons to have it, is because it's so much easier to head in the same direction and make a cohesive game if you're all agreeing on the highest level stuff. It's one of the reasons I love my gameplay pillars. Do you use gameplay pillars, Nate?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, it's a pretty common staple at this point, but it's just basically, creating some declarative statements about how the player should feel, that kind of thing. You can pass along to a composer and be like, this is how the player should feel. And that winds up creating something that is much more cohesive. Now, I also just dropped the links to your game. If I remember right, aren't you releasing like tomorrow?
Yeah, so tomorrow the game comes out on the PS5,
On the PS5.
which
Nice.
is really exciting.
Yeah, congratulations. How was that process?
It went really well. So I worked with this publisher, Dark Product, and so I didn't have to do that much on my end, mostly like some marketing stuff and cutting some trailers, and they handled the actual porting because even though I'm a solo dev and did a whole bunch of stuff, I did start to poke at doing a console port, and I was like, I don't know if this is the best way to spend my time.
This is, by the way,
It's a
one of
whole
the,
other thing.
it really is. This is one of the more common like publisher relationships you'll find. Actually, there's quite a few publishers out there where kind of their whole shtick is we'll port your game to the Switch, we'll port your game to the PS5. And it's one of the ones that I generally hear pretty good stuff about because, if you can get your game on a new console with minimal work and they take 30%, that's still, or, whatever relationship you do with them, that's still a portion of money that you just simply wouldn't have gotten as a solo developer. And more eyeballs and therefore more word of mouth. And in general, I hear good things about that. Do your research, of course.
Yeah, and the deals are often structured very differently because they're not like paying your salary for years. So it's really just whatever the porting costs are and marketing costs. And yeah, I think it can be a lot more beneficial.
Super fascinating. Awesome. I have a follow-up question from Christy. Thank you so much. That's great advice. She says, as a follow-up, do you use project management software to track your contractors' progress?
Not for the contractors, just because it's pretty straightforward and it's all in a work order. So it's more or less like, here's the deliverable, it's due by this date with like X number of revisions. So I didn't really find it necessary to track that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that is another interesting question. How do you alluded to something there, which is you said not for the contractors. So I'm assuming for yourself, you're using some kind of project management software.
Yeah. So personally, I use Asana for everything, and I break it down by like, this is what I'm doing today, this is what I'm doing this week, and I split it up between marketing and biz dev and actual development stuff. And then I have milestones past that. But I try not to get too granular about it until it's like within that week. I'm not like, oh, I'm going to do this monster mesh, this monster UVs and rig. I'll just be like, this monster by this day. Like, yeah, basically week-long chunks for a lot of things.
Yeah, that's another one.
I think it's good to have a production schedule, just not to get too obsessed with it, I suppose. It's always going to change.
Yeah, that's another one. That's great advice. And that's another one that I see solo devs skip a lot, or at least more junior developers skip a lot. They're just making a game. They're doing it for fun. So why would I have to track all the different tasks that I'm doing on the project? I know what I have to build. I'll just plug in a little bit more every week and eventually I'll get it done. Get it? Feel it? It's very nice to just build things and not really worry too much about what you're building. But if you're expecting to stick to a deadline, and if you're expecting any kind of, for the most part, financial success out of your game, building yourself an actual plan that you are consistently sticking to is one of the baseline skills that you should learn that will dramatically change your production levels and the reliability of getting your game done on a specific date. You can definitely move deadlines back. But in general, every time you move your deadlines back, every time you say, we said we were going to release it this date, but we're going to move it back more, especially as an indie dev where your reputation is not already set, like a Nintendo or something, you're hurting your audience by quite a lot. So get good at setting dates and then sticking to them. It's hugely valuable skill for solo development as well as for working for other people.
I would say to include that fudge factor there in your schedule, though, because you'll have these metrics for how long things take, but then like add like 30% for the unknowns, because the unknowns will always happen. Yeah.
A rule that I got given by one of my very first managers was, if you think it's going to take you a week, tell me, the manager, that it's going to take a month. Go 4x, because you'll be amazed. He specifically, in this case, was talking about juniors. You'll be amazed at how often you're overestimating your ability. I have a thing that I've struggled with here to ask you about personally. Add that fudge factor, 30%. I have found that when I add too much of a fudge factor, I just fill up the time. and then there's an extra 30% on top of that 30% I already added. How do I avoid that?
That's tough. I think it's mostly avoiding feature creep
Mhm.
and trying to have more of that at the end as opposed to as you're going all the time.
So how do you do that? Are you defining your feature set ahead of time and saying that's it? How much room are you leaving for feature creep when you're coming up with new cool ideas as you're playtesting with folks?
I suppose I like to make lists of things and then ask people about the game and think about it myself and think about what will really, really make a difference besides just what's nice, like what actually is part of the core experience to really, really push it forward.
Yeah. Yeah, that I at least have personally found that to be an endless balancing act of trying to decide whether or not a feature is worth adding to my time box or maybe cutting something else to make room for it, versus just like sticking to a rigid set of original goals, original tasks, I guess. I believe that sticking to a rigid set of original tasks is generally the wrong idea because you will inevitably change. No game design, similar to a plan, no game design quite survives contact with real players. You'll think that something's going to be awesome. A player will try it and be like, this kind of sucks. But then something else that you like just threw in for no reason will wind up being what they think is awesome. And so you want to lean into that more. So a certain amount of flexibility, I do believe, is very important to a good game. But it's the balancing act is making sure you can actually still hit your deadlines and how you manage that while also having room for a little flexibility.
Yeah, I think it's like a skill like anything else where you need to practice it and really think things through as from like a player's perspective also. Sometimes people get obsessed in overcomplicating and polishing things from a developer's perspective almost.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been trying actually. We recently launched a couple of Kickstarters with our students, and we had the Indie Game Clinic, which is a YouTube channel, review the games. And he brought up a game design point that I've been sort of meditating a lot lately on, which is a game as a toy first. If it is a fun, satisfying thing to play with first, independent of rule sets or goals or anything, if just the core of what you're doing, your core input, your core gameplay is a fun, satisfying thing that allows the player to just play on its own, everything else kind of follows and is a fun time. And I think giving yourself that room to experiment with that core toy, and making sure that the core toy is fun before you tack on a bunch of extra features, that winds up creating a much better game in the end. And I think if you have found yourself in a place, because I've seen a lot of people do this as well, where your solution to problems is to add more features, you're just tacking more things on, and you're like, eventually this will be good. You're in an endless loop. You'll never escape it. If the game's core isn't fun on its own, generally no amount of extra features is going to be fun, unless you're making RimWorld or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's very hard to actually ship something like that unless you're like a AAA company. Like I would argue that's kind of what Bethesda does, but they're multi-million-dollar projects, which is probably not how you want to start.
Yeah, probably you're not making a Skyrim competitor. I have a really interesting question here from Drew. Drew says, if you were given $100 to produce a new game, how would you distribute that $100? I'm assuming. So this is
only $100
from your lens. Yeah, I think 100% of your budget, we'll say.
I mean, that's really tough.
Yep.
I think it depends on the game, I suppose, and what are the most important things for it. Because in some games, like the art might not be as important. I would, if it's not high budget, I would deprioritize things like voiceover and not spend a whole bunch of money on expensive cinematics that people like to do. Like sometimes you see an indie game where they do like a really polished 2D trailer, and it's really easy for those things to cost like 25 grand or something like that. So finding the best bang for your buck and what fits the game the most.
Yeah, I think so. Part of what I assume Drew is asking here is just percentage breakdown. So you as a solo developer, if you had, let's say, $100,000 budget, then where would the percentages of your money go? What percentage would just pay yourself to eat? What percentage would like go to contractors? What percentage would get set aside for platform fees? I don't know. How would you break that down?
I mean, if it was from my perspective as like a solo dev, it's probably something like 2/3 of it are for me, and
Okay.
then like 10% for contractors, and then lawyer fees, and then hardware. I probably have to break out an exact spreadsheet on that, I suppose, but
Yeah.
the majority of it is probably going to be my salary.
Nice. Yeah. That still, I think, gives people some good perspective for solo developers and even small team development. I think when you are raising money, for anyone here who is attempting to raise money, do set yourself aside some money. I think indies indies will be like, oh, I could do it without the money, or I can work the second job or whatever. But if you are capable of raising money to pay for yourself, you will be so happy. All right, yeah.
Yes.
Neon Orange says, "Shout out for lawyer fees." I'll ask the question here.
Those are high.
Those
are
can be
very high.
definitely. So Neon says, "What
I
legal?"
probably paid as much to lawyers as contractors.
Oh man, that's interesting. I use a lot of. I don't know if I have spent that much in the past on stuff, but maybe I have fewer things that I'm doing. I also assume that you are doing things more right as somebody who's worked at such a big professional studio for a long time.
It depends how you look at it, because like one of those things that cost a lot is like trademark lawyers.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of different ways to file that. Like you can just file it yourself, or you can have someone else file it for you, or you can go international. And it's debatable whether or not you need to. But that is highly dependent on the title. Like in my case, there was a potential for something because there's like a game studio with Unseen in their name and stuff. So I was like, I want to make sure this is fine. I don't want to run into a problem down the road. So it's dependent on what you need to do, and like if you need heavy contracts reviewed versus like, oh, I just need to sign NDAs or send out work orders. It could be a lot more straightforward.
Yeah, interesting. So this alludes to Neon Orange Knight's question. What legal issues have you run into that an indie team probably wouldn't think of? So trademarks is maybe one of them.
Yeah, trademark is definitely the other one. And the other major one is just like reviewing actual contracts, not the boilerplate kind that you get from people. Like, but actual contracts. You really want to get a lawyer to go through those. And it might be fine, but you want someone who knows what they're doing to really dig through that stuff. Because I'm not a lawyer.
Yes.
Like I'm confident learning how to make a whole video game, but I would probably fall asleep in like the first 20 minutes of an actual contract reading.
Yeah, so you're talking like publishers, partners, potentially contractors. You want somebody to review that stuff. Yeah, that one's really one of the things I try to say to my students a lot is your lawyers are your friends, your lawyers are allies. Your lawyers want you to succeed because if you succeed, you will pay them more. I think indies will sometimes think of them as like this a bad guy, or at least like a scary entity. Like, oh man, I got to deal with a lawyer. First of all, Sam is in the chat right now, who's a lawyer in our community and is like one of the sweetest people on the planet. Hi, Sam. But second of all, yeah, your lawyers are your allies. They're a member of your team, and they're a contracted or sort of part-time member of your team, but they are a member of your team. And so, utilize them. It is much better to find out that a publishing deal is going to screw you over and spend a couple of grand on that than to get screwed over by a publishing deal. And most of the time, the contracts are not going to be predatory, but the one time that it is really sucks. So yeah, pay your lawyers. All right, I think I've got one more time for one last question here. This one's also from Christy. Christy's got a lot of questions today. That's great. Christy says, if an indie team chooses to make a small design pivot for their game later in the process of a year-long dev cycle, how long should this pivot extend development time for, or should it at all?
I mean, if it's going to be a pivot, I would assume it would extend it some, but a lot of that depends on how much you're able to afford to do and how much time you think it's going to take.
Yeah.
So it's a really contextual thing. But in general, I'll be very wary of pivots in general, because it can be too easy to do that when you don't really need to. Like, oh, we saw this cool game at E3. We should be more like this and become an extraction shooter or whatever. So just be wary.
Yeah, I think so. Christy, I work with fairly closely, so I know exactly what Christy's talking about. I would say, Christy, what I think anyway, what I'm assuming you're talking about is Christy's making a narrative deck builder for the most part. It's Mass Effect meets Slay the Spire. The pivot that she is likely referring to here is incorporating more of the narrative into the actual like combat of a card game. So you're playing the game, and the narrative is happening while you're playing the game. That I would say is a fairly small pivot, actually. That is not like changing the foundations of how your game works. That is instead just like being more efficient about how you tell your story. So with a pivot like that, where the game itself is still largely the same game, I would say a late stage pivot is a little bit more appropriate, probably. But I think your advice here, Nate, is a good one, which is basically avoid pivots past a point. There's a reason that we feature lock and then content lock. And when you hit those locks, you really should stick to your locks. And at that point, it's kind of accepting like, oh man, I had this cool idea. I'm already past my lock point though. And I, no longer like I'm accepting that this cool idea could be cool, but we're just not shipping with it. And that's okay.
Yeah. They say something like what no game has ever done. It's just shipped.
Yeah, right. No game is ever finished. It's just abandoned. Is the one I've heard anyway. Yeah. At some point, you're like, all right, I'm done. Awesome. All right, maybe we have time for this one then. So this will be truly the last question from Salar. How do you validate if your game idea is worth pursuing at full scale?
I mean, I think it's announcing it, marketing, and running play tests all the time. See how long people play it and what they say about it. Don't just work all on your own. Yeah. Even as a solo dev. Yeah. Yes. I constantly had like friends coming over and playing it and stuff.
Yeah, the earlier you're showing it to real people, I think the better in indie. There's more or less no reason to not market your games pretty much from day zero until you have a reputation to kind of uphold. So if you already have a big audience, if this is your second or your third game, then perhaps wait a second until you're feeling a little bit more confident about it. Do some closed door testing first. But for the most part, be as open as you can about like everything. In indie, it's better to get that attention and to start the conversation and to get people to give you their thoughts. That is dramatically more valuable than like the protection of somebody stealing your idea that isn't vetted. And so like, why would they steal your idea? Yeah.
I don't think that should be that much of a factor. It's very hard to replicate the same kind of thing unless you're doing something really simple.
Yeah.
And I'd also say that's the main reason to do showcases. It's not actually really worth it that much for like from a wish list perspective and marketing that you get out of it. But getting a bunch of people to play your game who aren't your friends, who don't care, and like they
will say mean things
they're
to you.
Just gonna walk away.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, that's super useful actually.
Yeah, it's another built skill that I don't think there are like strict rules that apply to every game to determine whether a game idea is promising. But you will start to build an instinct for it, and I think. If nothing else, grabbing some data, comparing game ideas. One of the simple things I like to do is to build fake ads for different games and run a bunch of them all at once and see how they perform against each other. So I can see that, like, what I would hope to see is that the idea that I want to build is the most marketable at the very least. That's something that you can do that's like inherently metric oriented. But really, I think the bottom line comes down to just do players like playing it? And they'll tell you. And it doesn't have to be all players for sure, but the players that you're really trying to build this for, which is another thing that you shouldn't skip. The players that you're really building this for, if you're building a deck builder, your deck builder players, people who build deck builders, which also requires you to ask them what they play, should be having a great time. And if they aren't, then that's a really damning thing, I think. If they are, then that's a really positive sign. And there's other things you'll look out for, people asking for information rather than needing to be sold. People wanting to work on the project is one that I like to call out sometimes. If somebody's like, man, I would love to contribute to this, that's a fantastic sign. There's a lot of those little moments, but basically just put it in front of humans and see what they think. Awesome. All right, we are coming to the end of the episode. Before we do anything else, though, we like to do two different things here. So first of all, Nate, do you have an extra credit assignment for us to do in the next week or so to help us practice some of what you talked about here today?
Sure, yeah. I think my little homework thing would be to come up with a pitch for a game and why there is like already a market for it, but also why there's a hole for your game. Because I think in a lot of cases, people might be like, oh, this is a thing that's popular, and make that. And that's a good start. But there needs to also be a gap. And in some cases, it might be like, oh, there's only a few of them, or it might be like something that used to be really popular that nobody's made for like a decade for some reason. Like, I mean, that's basically what happens with like stuff with like Vampire Survivors. And there's this game Cleared Hot that just came out that did really well. So I think that's a good thought exercise in coming to a game, because I think you can make a game that you want and you think is interesting, but you do want to make sure that it will have a chance at success.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. I love it as a homework assignment. So it is a two-parter. Both brainstorm a game concept and tell us about the existing audience, how you know that there is a real group of people who want this game. And then secondarily, tell us about why your game is in a unique hole. So tell us its unique value proposition. What is special about this game that will cause it to actually sell in this real audience that you have discovered? So two-parter, tell us how you know that there's an audience, and tell us how you know that your game is unique enough to stand out amongst that audience. We would love to see that posted to LinkedIn. That's what we always recommend. Do a little game dev practice in the next week. You can tag us, the Indie Game Academy, as well as Nate Purkeypile, and we will tell you that it looks great. All right. Is there any last words of wisdom or anything you'd like to plug here at the end of the episode, Nate?
Well, I mean, I guess the main thing to plug is to pick up the Axis Unseen on the PS5 tomorrow, and then keep an eye out for whatever I'll do next, because I think it'll be pretty awesome. Also, if you like 80s horror, you might like it.
Are you gonna continue with this trend? Are your games gonna continue to be 80s horror games?
I mean, I did the one after the Axis Unseen, which was like the total opposite, where it's all made out of Play-Doh and my kids make fun of you. So, but that was like a 1-month project.
Amazing. Awesome. So check out the Axis Unseen. I have dropped the links down below in the description. If you're listening to this episode after the fact, it will already be out on PS5. If you're here with us live on any of our platforms, the game is coming out tomorrow. So check out the Axis Unseen as well as Just Purkey Games. Nate, it's been a pleasure. Any last thoughts or anything else you want to throw in?
No, I think I'm all good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for coming. Oh my gosh, it started a little early. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And thank you, Nate, for answering your questions. It's been a pleasure. As always, we'll be here again next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Feel free to swing by and join us in the Discord then. Goodbye, all.
Game over.
There we go. All right, bye. All right, and those who are watching the recording live on the other platforms, thank you. We love you. See you again soon. Bye-bye.